Hello, everyone. My name is Paula Fitzgerald, and I'm Ayuda's Executive Director. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all this evening for Ayuda's second installment of our new speaker series, Faces of Change. For those of you who are joining Ayuda for the first time, we thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight. Ayuda is a local organization that provides legal, social, and language access services to help low-income immigrants in our neighborhoods access justice and transform their lives. Since 1973, we have served more than 150,000 low-income immigrants throughout Washington, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. This year, in this time of isolation, Ayuda created the Faces of Change speaker series to offer a space for informative and educational discourse on the impact of current events, cultural shifts, policy changes, and other issues that are affecting our communities. For this evening's installment of Faces of Change, our speaker series, we have assembled a panel of immigration policy experts to discuss immigration reform. But first, let me provide you with a bit of context to what President-elect Biden and his administration will be inheriting. The current administration, as many of you all know, has gutted protections for immigrants and intending immigrants. For survivors of persecution, this has included grinding refugee admissions to a halt and using every administrative tool available to seek to narrow asylum protections for individuals fleeing persecution already in the United States, including denying people entry at the border, increasing detention, separating families, metering border entries, and changing decades of case law defining to whom asylum is available. For survivors of crime in the United States, this has included efforts to deny access to protections available under US law, including efforts to make fee waivers less widely available, increase fees for certain applications, reject applications for leaving inapplicable boxes blank or writing none where the agency believes the proper response was NA, adjudicate applications for relief in punitive ways inconsistent with years of practice, and refer individuals denied protections into immigration proceedings. For families seeking to unite through US immigration laws, this has included seemingly countless bureaucratic changes to make the process more difficult, as well as enhanced public charge regulations imposing more severe wealth tests than ever before on intending immigrants. And for individuals who have long been in the United States, working and paying taxes, it has included terminating temporary protected status for many recipients, as well as efforts held unlawful by the Supreme Court and then renewed efforts held unlawful again just days ago by a federal district court to terminate the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or DACA. There have been hundreds of similar changes over the last 4 years. As devastating as these on this list, this is non-exhaustive. Without further ado, I am delighted to introduce tonight's moderator, news anchor for Noticiero Telemundo 44 in Washington, D.C., Alban Zamora. Alban is part of a multicultural Hispanic family. His father is Cuban and his mother is Dominican. As a childhood cancer survivor, Zamora's path has exceeded typical expectations. In the Dominican Republic, he was recognized for his generous commitment to local charities and was awarded the Premio Nacional de Juventud 2010. He received his bachelor's degree in his hometown of Santiago, Dominican Republic, and his master's degree in international journalism from the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos in Spain. With more than 15 years of experience in the news media field and having worked in 4 different countries, Spain, Dominican Republic, Mexico, and the USA, he brings the elements of diversity and multiculturalism to his work. Please join me in welcoming Alban.
Thank you, Paula, for such a lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be with Ayuda this evening, and I'm honored to serve as a host of the second installment of Faces of Change conversation. I'd like to add that today's programming is designed to inform and also educate without engaging in political campaigning or partisan activity. And joining me this evening to discuss these changes and how to reform the immigration system We have an incredible panel of the leaders in the community. Angela Kelly is a senior strategic advisor for immigration at the Open Society Foundations and Open Society Policy Center. Andrew Seeley is the president of the Migration Policy Institute. Paul Schmidt is a retired federal immigration judge and is now an adjunct professor at Georgetown Law. And Telemundo 44 is also pleased to be here as well, because this is a very important topic for our community in the DMV region. And we see it every day in our newscasts, how it impacts the lives of many residents and also their families. And one more thing, if you're watching this conversation live and would like to submit a question to the panelists, there is a Q&A function on your screen, and we'll try to address them all at the end of the conversation. And if we do not have time, the team of Ayuda will follow up with the answer. So let's start the conversation with the promises President-elect Biden has made for his first 100 days in office. Biden has stated clearly that one of his administration's top initiatives in his first 100 days in office will be to reinstate DACA, and is committed to a 100-day moratorium on deportation. Therefore, Angela, can you explain to our audience what a 100-day moratorium on deportation entails and what policy changes that we can expect to flow from it?
Great. That's a terrific question, Alban. I hope everybody can hear me. Somebody give me a thumbs up so I know that y'all can hear me. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much for having me, Ayuda. That is a place where I began my immigration career. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago. And it is where I fell in love, both with my husband and also with this community. And it's been my North Star ever since. So it's a real special honor to be with you guys tonight. It is also a much more hopeful place than we've been in a long time. President-elect Biden has, if you look on his website, the most comprehensive immigration plan really of any president-elect that I can remember. And that is because, as Paula so accurately stated, we are really having to come back from what has been just 4 years of absolute terror. This president has essentially set the house on fire around immigrants and refugees. And so where do we begin to build back? Well, as Alban pointed out, the 100-day moratorium is a really important place to start. The 100-day moratorium is like a pause or a temporary freeze on removals or deportations from this country that the president-elect has promised, so that, frankly, his new team can look under the hood and try to sort out the chaos of this administration and to try to restore humanity and more sensible priorities. You all might remember early in the Trump administration, one of the many actions that they did was to say, essentially, all 11 million are an equal priority for deportation. So we have seen people over the last few years, families torn apart, of undocumented folks that have lived in the US for years, who have family members here, children who are born here, businesses, homes, and they have been ripped away without regard to any of those equities. So the moratorium will be not only to hit the pause button on deporting people, but it'll also have to include a change in what those enforcement priorities look like on day one. Because it's great to not deport people, but you can't have ICE rounding up grandma on day one or abuelita. So there will have to be some sort of immediate guidelines to ICE agents about who it is that they can and can't be targeting. Now, they may be temporary guidelines that over time will become permanent. That would be my guess, because they're going to want to get the input of stakeholders both inside DHS and outside DHS to really land on what do those guidelines for removing people look like. That means we're also going to have, of course, changes in detention policy. And that's something that President-elect has committed to ending prolonged detention. As you know, there are a lot of what are called 287G, and that's just the section of the law, agreements between state and local police and ICE that frankly empower state and local police to act as ICE agents. And the Vice President-elect, I'm still getting used to saying that, has said that he intends to end those agreements that were entered into under the Trump administration. So that's going to be another change in how ICE does its operations. It's going to be much more contained, if you will. We know there are 1.2 million cases that are pending in the immigration courts. So another aspect of this might be that they will try to close those cases. And we saw Obama try to do that for where you've got a person who's been in the US for a long time, no criminal record, US citizen kids, you know, that sort of thing. They might just close those cases and get them off the books so that the courts are able to function better. Anyway, look, Alban, I am crystal ball gazing because of course nobody knows what this is going to look like. But certainly based on what the president-elect has said, what people in his campaign has said, these I think are pretty good guesses.
Angela, and what about the dreamers? What are the Biden administration's options for successfully advancing DACA and quickly changing the current DACA policies around not accepting new applications and only issuing one-year work permits, particularly in light of the Supreme Court's DACA decision during summer 2020? What would happen to them?
That's a great question, Alban. And again, it's going to be a little bit hard to know for sure how this is going to look. In this case, though, it's because, as you referenced, there was a Supreme Court case, a decision that came out where the court didn't rule on whether DACA is legal or not. It just said that the way the Trump administration tried to end the DACA program was a no-go, that they didn't follow the rules. And so what you saw was the Trump administration quickly say, okay, well, now we're going to try to end it correctly. The person that they started a process for that, but they haven't actually terminated the program completely yet. So there's a lot of avenues of uncertainty is probably the best way I can put it. We have another pending case in a Texas court that hasn't been resolved. It's being held by a judge who has indicated that he is not particularly supportive of the DACA program. He already ruled against another program that Obama tried to protect the parents of dreamers. So we've got that court case pending out there. We've got the Trump administration possibly acting to end the program. You've got court action that happened on Saturday where a New York court said, well, you know, time out. The person who's trying to end this program is an acting DHS secretary, and he's already been ruled to not be not have the authority to do that, to be acting because he hasn't been properly confirmed. So this action of trying to end DACA is a no-go. So wow, what a complicated litigation matrix in front of us, right? It's like a puzzle piece, many puzzle pieces. But here's what we do know, is that Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, has said over and over again that he is intent on protecting the DACA holders. And that's about 800,000 people who we know came to this country many years ago. They had to have been here by 2007. They were younger than 16 years old when they came to the US, and they are a wild success story. It is the case, though, that even if President-elect Biden could make those court cases go away, could make the Trump administration go away as he's done, that wouldn't protect the DACA population for some future president possibly taking away their work authorization and their protection from deportation. Why is that? There is no president in the world that can give a green card, no president in the United States that can give a green card to the DACA holders. Only Congress can do that. And so that's where it becomes very important that we keep our eyes, and I know we're going to talk about this a little later this evening, on what are the legislative opportunities so that we could pass a piece of legislation that could include a provision that would put the DACA holders on a path to citizenship. At the end of the day, that is the only way that they will have guaranteed protection in this country.
Thank you, Angela. Definitely many puzzles. So let's move on to another topic now that has been covered a lot in the media, including here at Telemundo, and has changed quite a bit, I would say, over the past 4 years: asylum. The current administration, we know that has sharply curbed refugee admissions and announced this past September that it would allow no more than 15,000 refugees in the 2021 fiscal year. Biden has said he would raise the annual ceiling for refugee admissions to 125,000, but has not said how quickly that would happen. So, Paul, what steps do you think a Biden administration can and will take to enhance the rights of asylum seekers in the US? In particular, would you expect a Biden administration attorney general to certify existing AG and Board of Immigration appeal decisions to themselves for re-adjudication, like matter of this Board of Immigration appeal?
Well, thank you, Alvin. Everybody hear me okay?
We do.
All right. Well, hope everybody out there in Cyberland is doing well. And, I missed the part earlier about political speeches. And so I am going to give you my disclaimer that I, of course, don't represent IUTA, my fellow panelists, anybody else of any importance whatsoever. And I hold everybody, including the audience, harmless. And of course, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm just an old retired immigration judge. So I'm going to tell you what needs to happen. Whether it will happen or not, different question. They're going to need a really good federal personnel expert so that they can immediately and legally clear out the deadwood and get the problem solvers from the new due process army, who are mostly now in the NGO and private sectors, in place at EOR to fix this system. And, there's a secret here, and that's granting relief wherever possible and at the lowest possible levels of the system, speeds things up and promotes best practices. It promotes maximum efficiency without stomping on anybody's rights. And just as an incidental matter, it saves lives. The converse of that is en masse denials, trying to run a deportation railroad, essentially leads to haste makes waste, gross inefficiency, systemic failure. That's what we're seeing right now. And it also kills innocent people, which we're also seeing now. First thing they need to do is immediately disempower the director, deputy director, head of the administration, the entire BIA, the chief immigration judge, and the general counsel over at the Executive Office for Immigration Review. They need to abolish the totally bogus and unnecessary Office of Policy and transfer all the existing folks to other jobs where they can't do any more damage to human lives or our legal system. Then you need to bring in on a temporary basis a team of problem solvers from the new due process army, like many of you out in the audience, like Paula Fitzgerald, Stacey Burston, people who know the system, know what's wrong, and have the guts to fix it. And they need to run at EOR, they need to take over the BIA, and they need to run OCIJ while the administration's getting a permanent team installed, which might or might not be the same people. The Attorney General needs to vacate every Sessions, Whitaker, and Barr precedent, thereby returning the law to its prior state, return the cases to the new BIA to let them handle as they see fit. And I'm confident that the new chief appellate judges at the BIA, Paula Fitzgerald and Stacey Burston, will rewrite the AB decision in a way that it'll serve as a precedent for granting not only that case, but many, many other deserving domestic violence cases. Then they need to cut the backlog that, just get all the non-detained, non-criminal cases more than 18 months old off the docket. There's a whole bunch of tools for doing that, which we could discuss later. And this will allow EOR to operate at or close to real time without building backlog. They got about 500 judges over there right now at 500 cases per year, which is probably about the due process limit. They can do 250 to 300,000 cases. So it's essential that DHS has to be required to respect and operate within that capacity, no more intentionally overloading the system to create, as they have now, bogus backlogs and then claim fake emergencies. You know, in the long run, they probably should consider transferring the asylum officers to EOR and using asylum officers similarly to U.S. magistrate judges in the Article 3 system. Then they need to establish quickly an efficient, timely merit selection process for future immigration judge appointments that emphasizes expertise in immigration, human rights, and demonstrated commitment to due process involving meaningful input from the private NGO and academic sectors. They need to bring in a true, you know, somebody that can manage, somebody like Paula or Michelle Pistone, to run EOR administration, to get the e-filing system that they've screwed up over the last 20 years in place, work cooperatively and creatively with the pro bono community toward universal representation, and train and accredit a lot more non-attorney representatives to fill the representation gap, particularly in asylum cases. There's probably, I'm not a techie, but there's probably tons of things that could be done with a competent technical systems manager. They need to make peace with the union, the NAIJ. As you know, there's been a bogus, totally ridiculous FLRA decision decertifying the NAIJ. They need to install Judge Tabador, one of her colleagues, as the new chief immigration judge with a mandate to fix the problems, can all the stupid and unproductive production quotas at the BIA and for IJs, and emphasize what other courts emphasize: fairness, scholarship, analysis, quality, and efficiency. And once the Biden-Harris team is in place at EOR, they need to get support, and they need to be allowed to work independently to creatively solve problems. No more political interference from downtown, no more micromanagement, no more certification of cases to the Attorney General unless requested by the BIA chair. We also need an Attorney General this time around for change who's an advocate for human rights and immigrants' rights. And you also need immigration and human rights experts from the new Due Process Army in authoritative positions in the Solicitor General's office, OIL, Office of Legal Policy, Office of Legal Counsel, Office of Legal Affairs for an ultimate Article 1 court, and of course, DHS, ORR, and the State Department. You know, my final thought on this: it isn't rocket science, it's common sense, practical scholarship, best practices, moral courage, humanity, and respect for human dignity. Now, that's all things that the folks at IUTA and most of you out in the audience have in abundance. We can solve this problem, but not with the group that's there now, and certainly not with the approach taken by past Democratic administrations that have been somewhere between indolent and incompetent. Now you see why I gave my disclaimer.
No, go ahead, sorry.
You see why I gave my disclaimer.
Yes.
You guys have nothing to do with this. But if they don't do this, you know, there's only two solutions here. You either solve the problem and solve it fast, or you own it. And if they own it, it'll be an embarrassing stain that will not get off the record of this or any other administration.
All right, Paul, thank you once again. And now, Andrew, the Biden campaign, we know that opposed family separation, but the Obama-Biden administration was a time of increased family detention. What can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Alvan. Great to be here. Like Angie, I worked at IUTA. In fact, we met each other at IUTA many years ago. I was more fleeting. I was there for a year and then on and off for about 3 summers. She actually worked as a real lawyer at IUTA. But we both have that strong tie and deep respect for what IUTA does, and so it's great to be with you tonight. I think I think we're likely to see a number of things. First, I think, you know, if they do the 100-day moratorium on apprehensions, on detentions in the U.S. and deportations, I think that's likely. You know, as far as we know, that's something they plan to do. They've announced it during the campaign. What the key is what happens on the other side of that. And I think what you're likely to see is something like the last 3 years of the Obama administration, not like the first 5 years. The first 5 years was the high watermark of detentions and deportations. But the last 3 years of the Obama administration, there was a very clear limitation of discretion for ICE to detain and deport people. They were 3 priority criteria all around criminal records, significant criminal actions, and national security threats. 87% of people in the country without documents were no longer priorities and could live more or less in peace. Now, there's always, anyone who's undocumented, I know, always lives with a degree of concern as long as they don't have legal papers. But for the most part, you know, all but 13% of the population really was no longer a priority, and certainly reduced the kind of fear that we've seen, as Paul was talking about earlier, the kind of fear we've seen in the community because people really don't know who's a priority, right? Anyone is a priority for action by ICE. So I think that's the first thing, is I think you will see enforcement guidance. I think it'll probably look like what it looked like at the end of the Obama administration. Some people would like more, some would like less, but you'll see something similar to that. I'd be surprised if you don't. I think the second thing is obviously you're going to see something around DACA. You might see an attempt at legislation. And you will see TPS also, which matters a great deal in our area in Washington, D.C., for Salvadorans, Hondurans, Haitians, and others. I think you'll see the administration unwind the winding down of TPS. This is more complicated. I say it in a complicated way because it is in fact complicated. This administration now has permission from the courts to wind down the TPSs. They said they were going to wind them down. It was stayed in the courts. Now the permission to proceed. They have not started the clock as last time I checked. So this will then, the TPSs will still be in effect when Joe Biden takes over as president. The Salvadoran TPS is actually extended an additional 6 months. So it is actually, will go on at least until the fall. And they have time to unwind the winding down, to reverse that and allow people to stay in the country. One of the questions is, as Angie said, you know, will there be a legislative remedy or not? And I think that's a big question. Will there be an attempt to, you know, and that depends a lot on where Republicans are after January 20th. Will there be an attempt to do a slim DACA bill, which has been popular among some Republicans, maybe combined with TPS to try and do a remedy that's more permanent for people that have DACA and TPS? And perhaps in the case of DACA, as Angie said, you know, part of reinstating DACA is not just for those that have it now, but a larger universe of people, which we think maybe about 1.3 million or so total, including current population, who might be eligible, who meet the criteria if they allowed new admissions to DACA. So, you know, they can do that administratively. The question is, could they do it also legislatively if they were opening on the Republican side for negotiation? A couple of the things that are worth thinking about. I would just say on public charge is another fear of the community, and it's been an enforcement issue, both how to keep people coming in who cannot prove that they can support themselves, but also, and I'm looking around here, I can't find it immediately on my desktop, but I literally found, my mother came as an immigrant to the United States in the 1960s, and I literally, going through a box of things last week, found the public charge regulations that she was given at the embassy in the country that she was coming from. She wasn't actually coming from her home country. She was coming from the Philippines. She's from Denmark, but actually found it's 2 pages thick. I'm looking at this going, how in the 1960s are you going to gather this sort of documentation, being in a country that is not even your home country where you have access to your documents? I mean, we've created a monster with public charge. We can talk about this more in Q&A, which is really prohibitive for lots of people to be able to come into the United States, but also prohibitive for people in the United States to apply for their relatives to come to the US, right, through family reunification programs. It also puts people at fear of, if they try and adjust their status, of also being denied that. So that's another element of fear that I think you're going to see a Biden administration try and wind down. However, it's a rule that took them 1.5 years to put into effect, and it is going to take, you know, months, if not more than a year, to try and undo public charge. And the final thing, let me just say on asylum, just because it is an issue that we care about a great deal at MPI. So just to add to what Paul said, I think one of the things you will see a Biden administration try and do, it's in at least their campaign statements, but I think it is what makes the most sense, is I think you will see them trying to put asylum officers in charge of asylum decisions for people at the border. Historically, what's happened is because people are in removal proceedings, once they're apprehended at the border, their case gets sent. If they pass credible fear, their case then is sent to an immigration court, or they have to apply for asylum to an immigration court, which is different than if you apply affirmatively for asylum. If you're in the country on a legal visa and you walk into a USCIS, I'm the one non-lawyer, so Angie and Paul can correct me. We got a judge and a lawyer here. So if I misstate anything, please correct me. I'm the one non-lawyer here. This is the, I have a public policy degree, which is, you know a little bit about everything but specifically about nothing, right? If you walk in affirmatively, your case will be heard by an asylum officer. This is not the case if you're apprehended at the border because you're in removal proceedings, and so your case is sent to the immigration courts. We could make these decisions both more fairly and more efficiently by putting asylum officers in charge. They are the ones who have the skills and the ability to do this. You don't need to clog an already clogged system, and it would expedite the process and would probably give a much more even treatment also to the cases at the border. And I think you're likely to see a Biden administration try and do that, as well as a number of other things to try and fix the border so that there is a system that we have surge capacity when there are large numbers of people coming. We can do some triage on who needs protection and who doesn't. And I think we're likely to see them try and do some protection closer to home where people live, some work-based programs so people have options to come work in the United States, as well as continue some of the enforcement, because I don't think we should deceive ourselves. A Biden administration will also, at least on the external borders, will have to maintain an enforcement regime so there are not huge surges of people. I think you're going to see a great focus on being much more generous with people who are in this country, because it's in the interest of all of us, because we want to make sure that everyone who's in this country is productive. Everyone in this country can live a full life, can be part of our democratic system. But you are going to see more caution when it comes to who comes into the country and whether people can get into the country without documents. I think that will be actually where you'll see the toughness, but you're not going to see it on deportations from the interior of the country of people who are already here, who have not committed crimes.
Thank you, Andrew. And now let's move on to another topic affecting thousands and thousands of immigrants, especially here in the DC metropolitan area, the TPS, the Temporary Protected Status. Biden has stated that his administration will order an immediate review of the TPS for vulnerable populations who cannot find safety in their countries that have been ripped apart by violence or disasters. Angela, what steps could the Biden administration do immediately upon taking office to provide stability to a certain extent to the hundreds of thousands of TPS beneficiaries who have been left in limbo for the last 3 years after the Trump administration first threatened to withdraw TPS?
Yeah, thank you, Alvin. Great question. And I think Andrew actually addressed it really nicely, but I can just recap because this is very important, particularly in this region where so many people have TPS. So this is clear. This is like right over home plate, right? Because there was temporary protected status was established in legislation back in 1990. And it says very specifically that the Secretary of Homeland Security, in this case, he used to be the Attorney General, can say that because of armed conflict, ongoing armed conflict, because of a natural disaster, that you can give people protection for 6, 12, or 18 months. And that means work authorization and you won't be deported. So that is what Salvadorans and Haitians and a number of nationalities have had, and Trump took away. Enter the courts again. And there has been, as Andrew indicated, a real slowdown in being able to actually end the TPS protections. What Biden can do is take those populations and say, I'm giving them TPS, and put it right back where it was for a period of 18 months. In talking to the Haitian community while he was campaigning, he did promise them that they would be protected by TPS. His platform talks about a review of all TPS nationalities in the program generally, and he also talks about emphasizing it in the legislation that he intends to introduce. But I think it's going to be very difficult for them to do anything but reinstate TPS for people, difficult politically and difficult practically, because the reality is because of climate change, a different topic for another speaker series. There have been, 2 storms in the last 14 days that have decimated parts of Nicaragua, of Honduras, of Guatemala, of El Salvador. It's the same countries. And so I think, frankly, the new approach should be, not only do we want to restore the TPS to the countries that had it, but we should be considering a new TPS designation for countries where they simply can't be sent back home. What would that mean? Depending on the day that it gets designated, it could be that as of January 31st, pick a day, that anybody who is in the US as of that day could get temporary protected status if they're from Guatemala, let's say. And then that would mean that those folks would be protected from being removed. They would get work authorization. They could send remittances back home, which could help stabilize the situation there and their families and their communities, and maybe encourage people to stay. And so I think that's a real live early policy option that advocates should be pushing. But at the end of the day, I'm going to say the same thing that I said regarding the DACA holders, which, Alban, it is very frustrating, but the president cannot give TPS holders a green card and put them on a path to citizenship. Only Congress can do that.
Thank you very much, Angela. And I know we talked about it a couple of minutes ago, but Paul, I would like to ask you as well, how could TPS provide protection from deportation to those immigrants who were not protected by the prior iterations of TPS, Paul?
I just want to thank my fellow panelists, Andrew and Angela, for illustrating my point about how members of the new Due Process Army put into the correct policy and legal positions. Every idea they had was 10 times better than any idea that the folks running EOR, DOJ, or DHS have had. So, you know, a lot of the problem we have now is we got the wrong people in place, and that was the problem with the Obama administration. You need to get the people with the answers, the problem solvers, the thinkers who understand the system into the positions where they can solve the problems and get rid of the tons of deadwood and worse than deadwood that are in the system right now. Those are all great ideas. Those are all the ideas that would help the system run. They're all ideas that would help reduce unnecessary backlog in the immigration courts. And they're all things that this administration has undermined and that the previous administration really didn't take full advantage of because they had the wrong people calling the shots. TPS can be a much more powerful tool. And the first, you can use it, you use it to take care probably of most of the DACA people. A lot of the DACA people, almost all the people, old cases on the immigration court backlog can be TPS'd out. There's, as the prior panelists have said, there are members of our society that pay taxes. Most of them have US citizen kids. It would actually, given the fact that a lot of them are working in essential occupations, healthcare, food production, it would actually probably be a further blow to our economy if we removed all those people and they leave their US citizen children behind. And it would be a waste of taxpayer money at a time when we don't have taxpayer money to waste. So, you know, one of the reasons for granting TPS is because of epidemic or other natural emergency. And as Angela just very cogently pointed out, we've had a horrible hurricane hit the Central America with potentially devastating effects, not just the immediate loss of life, but on the economy, on the social structure. That was actually, Hurricane Mitch was actually the basis for prior TPS programs for Central America. So clearly the stage is set to take a lot of the cases off the backlog, give them TPS. And I think that reversing the stupidity and cruelty of this administration, rather than using kind of a bogus health argument to stop everybody from coming into the United States, you could easily use TPS as a basis to basically stop deporting people to countries that, where you're going to be spreading the disease. And the United States has done such a lousy job on it that really sending people from the United States to other countries is quite dangerous. Certainly that would be a basis, the worldwide pandemic and its disorder and the travel problems for just holding everything in place for at least the next year to see how it plays out. There are Angela said TPS doesn't give you green cards, but that's not totally true. There are ways, if people in TPS status qualify to immigrate through a citizen spouse, a parent, there are ways that they should be able to be adjusted through a clause in the TPS program. This administration, there are several court decisions. I think the Ninth Circuit, maybe the Fourth Circuit and other circuits have said that this provision means exactly what it says, that folks that are eligible can adjust without leaving the country. The government has undermined those interpretations, but I'm confident that when Chief Appellate Judges Fitzgerald and Bruston take over, that they and their colleagues in the new Due Process Army on the new board will scrap those misinterpretations and apply the rule nationwide, which makes every bit of sense. I don't know, some of you remember I granted those cases back in the Arlington Immigration Court years ago, just based on the clear statutory language and the lack of any board precedent going the other way. So we have an administration that takes the law, thinks of the dumbest, cruelest, most counterproductive, stupidest way to apply it, and then they tell the board to adopt that as an interpretation. But what if we had people that were problem solvers instead of problem creators? The board really could be a leading light of not only rational interpretations that advance the law and make sense, practical scholarship, but also with a little beef and a little more courage, they could start cracking heads over at DHS on folks that blow off policies and create backlog. I mean, one of the problems with the Obama administration PD program, it worked really well in Arlington because the chief counsels took it seriously and they did a good job and they took responsibility. But I also know enough from sitting in some other areas and watching our law clerks work on cases from other areas that in some offices, the chief counsel just said, oh, our field office director doesn't follow that policy. So, tough luck, Judge. I mean, this is outrageous. I mean, the field office directors who don't follow the policies shouldn't be field office directors. And we need to run this system in a way that the next DHS attorney that makes absurd arguments like that finds himself with a disciplinary referral or referred to the state bar authorities. I mean, we've been putting up for absurdity in this system for far, far too long, and it's a killer. So time to end the clown show, time to put due process, fundamental fairness, common sense, and human decency back in the equation and build what could be the world's best court system. And it's not a court system that anybody needs Mitch McConnell's permission to staff. This is a court system owned by the Biden administration, and they damn well better do a better job on it than the Obama administration did.
Paul, we appreciate those words. Thank you. And right now, I want to take a few seconds just to remind everyone that we have an area, a Q&A area function at the bottom of your screen that you can use right now. And we have been receiving great questions. And let me see which one is the first one. Here it is. Let's get to those before we wrap up the evening. The first one says, how could the Biden-Harris administration effectively restaff the executive office for immigration such that immigration judges with 95% plus asylum denial rates are removed from their positions? Who can help us answering that question? Andrew? Angela?
I'm
This
the
is
one
right-
non-lawyer, so that's
Right.
one of the two of you, I think.
No, this is up Paul's alley. He's got the answer. I can feel it.
But you're on mute, Paul.
Yeah. You gotta get off that mute barrier.
There you go.
No, I mean, I basically gave you the answer to that one. They need to clean out the maliciously incompetent management at EOR immediately, transfer the board members to other positions, put in, folks like Paula, Stacy, other folks that know what they're doing, and, members of the new due process army, the people that have been the leaders of the trying to keep democracy alive here, and then have them crack heads. You can change the law. A better board can ride herd on the immigration judges, and if the people can't get with the program, they can find other jobs. I think you're gonna, there are a lot of immigration judges out there on 2-year probation. You can develop merit criteria with outside input for hiring new judges, bring in a lot more people from the new due process army, and run the judges coming off probation through the merit selection criteria. And if they're not really the best person for the job, then terminate them. We got to get serious. The Obama administration appointed 92% of insiders, government people. They shut out the problem solvers in the private bar, the people that really carried the water. And of course, this administration has been worse. They've appointed folks from FAIR, religiously intolerant groups, all sorts of unqualified, judges who had complaints filed against them in the state system. They filled the board with the worst immigration judges in the country, folks who followed bad practices. That can all change. I think the key is get rid of the current EOR management, put competent folks in there, replace the board with real judges and take it from there. Real judges can figure out a way to line up the immigration judges or find them other jobs. And we also need e-filing. This whole, having 1.5 million cases and another 500,000 probably sitting on the floor somewhere with no e-filing. It's a national disgrace. And, folks, it's too late to hold folks accountable. We just need somebody with some brains and knowledge in there to solve the problem. It's not rocket science. Hell, the state courts in Wisconsin are, that isn't exactly the cutting edge of technology, but they've all got e-filing. Every other court system in the country has it. EOR's squandered their money on stupid things like immigration judge dashboards to keep track of, when the immigration judges are taking bathroom breaks and how many denials they have. It's outrageous. It really is. It's a misappropriation of government funds, and the people responsible for it need to be transferred to other jobs that maybe they can do, maybe they can't. And if they can't,
Okay, thank you, Paul. And we have one more question here. With respect to the various proposed actions that have been mentioned, which can be done quickly by the president and his administration, which require more time-consuming notice and common rulemaking, and which require legislation. Angela.
Well, what could be done quickly? The moratorium could be done on day one. And then that will, as I explained, mean that there will be new enforcement priorities or guidelines for who ICE can detain and pick up and detain. So that can happen immediately. With TPS, there is a process that has to be gone through, but that could be relatively quickly, where there's got to be consultation with the State Department. But again, this can go through the system. With DACA, I mean, I think you'll certainly hear on day one a presidential, proclamation or memorandum, like saying we're going to protect these folks. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an Attorney General memo that laid that out. Probably a DHS Secretary memo would also be needed. If there has been a negative court action that has happened before Inauguration Day, which could be the case, then you would need to have the Department of Justice lawyers ready to file papers right away to try to stop that. So it's a bit more fluid with DACA, but I'm convinced that whatever tools are in the arsenal of the Biden administration, that they would apply them to protect them for the reasons that we've said. In terms of people having green cards, then that is going to need legislation. We haven't talked as much about the travel bans, the entry bans, the Muslim ban, like all that can be reversed with an executive order that basically flips the switch the other way. I imagine those are being prepared. The public charge rule, I think that is going to be probably a little bit trickier. Andrew, you know more than I know on this, but again, I think it's a process that can and will begin right away. Again, these are promises that are in black and white all over the place. So the Biden administration can't say, hey, just kidding, we're not going to do it. They're going to have to do it.
Can I jump in also?
Oh yeah, please. On asylum
yes.
especially. Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think there's a lot of stuff that has to, just with going with Angela said, I mean, there's things that have to happen day one that you will see day one. I mean, the reversing the travel ban, something on DACA. I mean, you'll see that. Some other stuff will be like, public charge, fixing the asylum system. I hope they will start day one and do this day two once they figure out where their desks are, although a lot of us will be remote at that point. But, once hopefully it's a day two, day three thing, because it's going to take a while to do it, but it doesn't mean they're not working on it, right? I mean, it's going to be a process. Reversing the TPS closures is something you have to start on quickly, even though it's going to take a little time to actually get there. I'm a little more skeptical if they'll do TPS for Guatemalans and Hondurans because of the current hurricanes. I think it's a good idea that Guatemalans are asking for it. Guatemalan government, I think it's a good idea, but I'm not sure what the appetite will be. We have heard a promise to do a TPS for Venezuelans in the country. We think there's a couple 100,000 people, probably 150 to 200,000 Venezuelans, either without documents or somewhere in the asylum system, but without a grant of asylum, seeking asylum. So there's a large number of people will be affected by that. Again, I don't know if that'll happen. There's been a bit of a backlash against new TPSs. So I think that's a question. And I just wanted to throw out a few things to keep our eyes open for. I mean, one promise that has been, subtext, but occasionally, but I think is actually in the original Biden campaign promises, is legalizing everyone that's in the U.S. That's going to be hard in a divided Congress. Even if the Democrats were to win Georgia, it is a very narrow congressional majority. It's a 50-50 Congress with a vice president, Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker. That's hard. So I think those sort of grand promises may not happen, but I would look at other things they might do. I mean, can they get rid of the bars that there's probably 1.3 million people married to a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident who can't get legalized, which normally you'd be able to because of the 3 and 5 year bars, right? Or the 5 and 10 year bars. I mean, you would know, Angie knows this area better than I do, so you may want to jump in on this. But that's one practical way you legalize people. Can you do something about essential workers, right? I mean, maybe give some religious. Can you do something at the registry date, the date from which is 1972 right now, is the date where if you've been in the country since then, you can apply to get on a pathway to permanent residence and eventually citizenship. Can we bring that up a little bit? Maybe that's a negotiation in Congress. And we're all used to, in our recent memory, in the last 20 years, we're used to negotiation of immigration, facilitation for immigration enforcement, right? You do something, you make it harder to cross the border, in return you facilitate something. That's been our template. We're in a different world now. I mean, maybe you're negotiating bank regulations and, you know, the registry date. Maybe it's in the context of a budget negotiation that, you know, I mean, maybe it's a different bill, but it may in the end, you know, these may be things where the negotiations are on multiple levels around different issues. There again, maybe no negotiations. I mean, you know, probably the more likely possibility is that Republicans are not going to be ready to go there. It's not going to be the top priority for Democrats, and nothing's going to happen. I think that's the most likely for legislative solutions. But I think there is a play out in which there's a multi-level game going on, in which some of these practical things that they don't legalize 11 million people, but they begin to deal with 1 million people here, 1 million people there, and you begin to actually get some momentum could happen. And then the other two I would look at are well, actually three things, but the other two on visas, I'd look at agricultural visas, H-2A visas. There's been negotiation between growers and unions about ways of fixing the H-2A program. It's important because this is one of the ways we can create a labor pathway for Central Americans. There are 260,000 Mexicans who come on the H-2A, H-2B visas a year, less than 10,000 Central Americans. One of the ways you actually create a legal pathway so people don't have to go illegally to the United States is by looking at our seasonal work programs. We should be looking at H-1B reform. That's an opportunity for Democrats and Republicans, the high-tech, high-skilled visas. And then the final thing is COVID relief. I mean, COVID relief we know is going to be on the table. And is COVID relief accessible to people who don't have documents? You know, with the Trump administration, it was not accessible even to people who were legally in the country, but where one of the heads of household was not legally, did not have legal documents. You know, will we see a COVID relief bill that actually reaches all Americans or almost all Americans, right? I mean, who need it. And you know, that's another area of opportunity. It sounds like a small thing, but it really is a huge thing in terms of people's life right now.
Many areas of opportunities, and one fact that you just mentioned, Andrew, is that everything from now on will take a lot of negotiation for sure. So we have one last question, and is, what is the greatest risk for immigrants and advocates under a Biden administration? For example, the risk of Biden neglecting the issues or being comprising too much with a Republican Senate. What would you say to that? Who would like to start? Paul.
Yeah, well, I've given you the greatest danger is it's a repeat of the Obama administration, and they don't clean house. They don't get rid of the folks at Justice, EOR, Department of State, and DHS who've screwed the system up. DHS has actually become a political tool of the president. It needs a complete house cleaning and some discipline and ethics put in. If they try and solve the problem with the same old, you know, folks retreads and folks that have been in Washington too long, it won't solve. You need to get the folks with the answers, the new blood, the energy. You need the folks in this audience. You need the folks at IUTA in charge of the system. We need to stop spinning our wheels, you know, arguing with bureaucrats who don't get it about what needs to be done to save our country. And you're not going to do it with the approach that the past administrations have used. You need new blood. You need to clean house. You need some people who are going to take names, kick tail, and get due process, fundamental fairness, human dignity, and common sense back into the government. It's not rocket science, but it does take a little bit of backbone. Backbone has not been a specialty of Democratic administrations.
Angela, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow Paul. That was super well said, just in terms of needing a massive culture shift and personnel shift within the agency. Absolutely, that's step one. That takes time, right? It's like getting fat. You know, it takes time till you get fat, and then you have to like diet, and that takes time to lose the weight. So I think we have to have a measure of patience. And I think that legislatively, I thought Andrew's analysis was spot on. There is a lot that this administration is going to be dealing with because of COVID, because of the economic crisis. And the tightness of what we, maybe a control of the Senate. So I think it's not as much neglect as it is, it's that really the first year is when you've got the most political capital, and that's when you can get something done. And so we would need to try to move quickly. And I think it's going to have to be a more narrow fix, like Andrew suggested, but that's not insignificant, folks, right? If we could protect the DACA population and put them on a path to citizenship, that is really a step in the right direction. And I think we could probably get more.
And if I could jump in and say something controversial to end, I mean, I think I worry about Democrats making the same mistake all over again of thinking that immigration is only about immigrants. I think so much of the case on immigration is made in terms of either being good to immigrants or keeping immigrants out, or, and I think the case needs to be made, and it's the right case, that immigration is part of the secret sauce that makes the country work. It's part of our identity as a country. It's part of our leadership in the world. It's part of what the world sees of us. The two things that people see about us that they see as unique are our democratic practice, with all its warts, with all its problems, and our diversity as a country, again, with all its problems and backsliding and insufficiencies, right? I mean, these are things that people abroad see of us. And you've lived around the world, so you're testimony to this. This is when people look at the United States. These are things that people say, yeah, they got lots of problems that we don't always agree with what they do, but it's a country that's managed its diversity and managed to self-govern for years. We've lost that in the last 4 years. So the question is, can you make the case? It's about American leadership. It's about our competitiveness as a country. It's about our innovation as a country. It's about our entrepreneurship. It's about our recovery. How do we get everyone who could be productive in American society on board as we're trying to recover the economy, with COVID-19 and after COVID-19? You don't want to leave people who are less productive because they're undocumented. You don't want to leave gaps in the labor market because you don't have people to fill them. Immigration fits in to our plans as a country. And yes, it's about immigrants, and we always want to treat immigrants with dignity. I mean, that should be central, but it's about all of us, right? I mean, it's about immigrants and the rest of us, right? I mean, it's about all of us and how we make our country the best it can be. And I hope that affirmative case is made going forward by the Biden administration. I hope Kamala Harris, who grew up in a true immigrant family, right? I mean, who herself had spoke about this on the night of their acceptance speeches. I hope, she's one of the driving forces of reminding President Biden constantly of why immigration matters for the country as a whole.
Definitely, it's about everyone, as you mentioned, and there are many things at stake. So I just want to right now to thank all of our panelists for such a compelling conversation, having these kinds of space to engage and inform the public on these pressing issues facing our communities that is so important. And a special thank you to Ayuda for your commitment to supporting immigrants in DC, Virginia, and Maryland. And now I would like to introduce Ayuda's legal director, Lori Ball Cooper, who will close out this evening's program. As legal director, Lori provides leadership, vision, and also support to Ayuda's legal services teams across its offices and practice areas. Lori previously served as a senior staff attorney in Ayuda's pro bono program. She has represented immigrants and survivors of trauma in many capacities throughout her career, including as a Skadden Fellow at the Tahara Justice Center, at the Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia, and in the Human Rights Practice Group at the private law firm Cohen, Maystein, Sellers, and Toll. Prior to her work in direct legal services, Lori was a law clerk to the Honorable Mary Margaret McMahon on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and worked in international development and human rights. So please join me in welcoming Lori Ball Cooper.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Ayuda, it's my great pleasure to thank all of you, Alvin, our moderator, Angela, Andrew, and Judge Smith. This was such an energizing conversation after such an exhausting 4 years. And it ran the gamut from e-filing to comprehensive immigration reform and paths to citizenship or green cards. And all of it really deeply important in this time. And I think it's so great that we've had a space tonight to talk about each of the steps there and everything in between. There are so many challenges ahead, recovering from what the last 4 years have wrought and what the years before that also wrought, as Judge Schmidt pointed out several times. This has not been a short disaster in the making, and it will be a long recovery. And the members of the Due Process Army, including all of us in IUTHA's legal department, are going to need to remain committed to protecting our clients' interests in the years ahead and to advancing the hopes that we have for rebirth of possibilities for immigrants in the United States, immigrants intending to come to the United States, and those seeking a future and especially protection here. The recovery will likely be long, it will be involved, it will require those of us in the Due Process Army to remain relentless in our fight, but we at IUTHA are prepared to do that as we have been since 1973. We're so grateful to all of you for joining this conversation tonight. We know that time is limited, particularly in these moments that 2020 has brought us. We're looking forward to 2021, and we hope that you'll join us on January 28th for our next Faces of Change speaker series, which will focus on human trafficking and the anti-trafficking movement, of which IUTHA is a proud member, as we commemorate January, which is a month in honor of human trafficking awareness. We also hope that you'll join us on Giving Tuesday, December 1st, coming up very soon, for IUTHA's Comedy Night for Immigrant Rights. Tickets are available at a link that should be showing up in the chat now, and we hope you'll join us, and we hope you'll consider us as we launch our end of the year giving program for IUTHA, and as many of us take a look and take stock and have some gratitude for all that we've been able to pursue in the last year. We at IUTHA are so grateful to all of you for your support, for your interest, for your dedication to our clients, and for your advocacy. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.